Good morning everyone, I'm Morgan Donner, and today I want to make a Saint Birgitta cap, which is a type of medieval hat that was found in a lovely find and talked about in this beautiful book. The extant cap was way too small for my head anyways. It was, I believe, 17 inches around-ish and like 12 inches from here to the center back, and that's not going to do for me. So first things first for making my own cap is to go ahead and measure up. Okay, so first up would be to measure around the hairline here. I'm not sure if I want to include the ears or not, because that would make it a little bit bigger. 23 inches. Just for comparison, let's see how much it would be without the ears. 22.5. Okay, so not a huge difference there. And then from the start of my hairline here, down the center, and to the nape of my neck, that came out to 14. So that's actually only a couple inches bigger than the original. Alright, I do think I want to add another inch or so to that measurement. Actually, you know what? Instead of just guessing, let's just do the thing. The thing about this cap is that the proposed wear, based on some of the medieval images you can find from manuscripts showing something that kind of looks like it might be this same extant cap in picture form, is there's a lot of fullness kind of behind and to the back of the head. So what I'm going to do is going to take my hair, pin it up behind my head, and it won't be a perfect analog for what I need measurement wise, but maybe a little bit closer than without. Okay, I'm sure that's a lovely mess, but it should give me a better base to measure against. Wow, and that added a whole inch and a half. And bit some of my hair with it. Bad measuring tape. Alright, so let's go ahead and take those same measurements and put them down on paper. So to draw down a pattern, you could use standard butcher paper type brown rolls, or if you're feeling a little bit fancy or lazy, you can use some beautiful wrapping paper here, very fancy on this side, and has a 1-inch grid on the inside, which is very handy. So my hairline measurement, which this is going to be the hairline side, was 23 inches. And I'm going to make 2 halves, which means that this line needs to be half that, 11.5. And then this measurement is going to also get gathered a little bit, and that gathering needs to be part of my total measurement around that hairline. So we're actually going to go ahead and take out another inch or so from here. Minus an inch, we get 10.5. So I'm going to arbitrarily pick a spot over here to be my front corner, and we're going to measure up 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then measuring down the center of the head was 15.5. 15 is about here. Good enough. I don't have one of those fancy curved rulers, so this will have to do. Looks like I actually need a little bit more. So let's extend this curve a bit. And this is, sorry if I got a little bit out of frame there, but here's my vague cap size. Now, of course, never just trust that it's going to be correct. Definitely make a mock-up. So I've gone ahead and cut out a pair of linens to match our cap. And a piece I definitely don't want to forget is the fact that the original cap has embroidery down the center. Now, I'm not going to bother embroidering something that's just a mock-up, but this is a little bit bigger than the width of the original, but not by much, just a little smooch. So this will be a good replacement for our mock-up here. So I got that stitched in very quickly here. You can see that there's little seam allowance on the inside. Whenever I sew the actual final version, I'll be hand sewing this seam allowance, and it will be a rolled hem, so it will indeed be nice and tiny. And so I've gotten that stitched up. I left the ends unsewn, just like the original. So, well, not unsewn, but unattached. So the original had this hemmed. We don't really need to worry about that for a mock-up. But we do need to go ahead and gather up this bottom edge. So whenever I do gathering for such a little section like this, I usually like to go ahead and do a couple passes, just because it's very easy for this little section to break, and a couple passes of thread will help keep it a little bit stronger. That's maybe a little bit too tight, but it's close enough right now. So here is my little cap. I went ahead and got those two bottom edges down here gathered up, and let's see how she fits. I did redo my hair because the one braid thing wasn't going to work for this video, or for this part of the video. I needed to have it in this double braid configuration so that it is filling the right area of the cap. So let's see how she does. It feels okay. So the original cap has an additional band around the perimeter, which then crosses over in the back so that you can cinch it tighter like this. And I feel like my hair is trying to fall out of that little gap in the back, so I might need to make my split at the bottom of the cap just a little bit smaller. Let me grab a mirror in the form of my phone. Oh, well, maybe that's not so bad. I do feel like it could be a little bit further down in the front, because this feels like maybe just a little bit too much hair showing. It could stand to be just maybe a little bit bigger from here back and around. The size this way does still feel pretty good, I think. I'm going to go ahead and lengthen this. That will make it so that I can have it a little bit longer in the front, and I think that should also make it so that if there's a little bit more here at the bottom, it'll be able to curve kind of around the fullness at the back of my head, at the back of my neck, while this just doesn't quite have enough room to do so. So let's go ahead and change the pattern. So I'm back at my pattern table here with the pattern that we used to make the cap you just saw, and I noticed something when I went back to double check some details in the book here. So the original cap is not quite so tall and narrow as what I did. It's a little bit more of a, honestly, kind of a quarter circle. So I think what I need to do is make mine just a little bit more like a good old slice of pie. Let's do this. Start at this corner to here to here. Okay, so this is my original with my wavy lines, and then this was 10 inches, and this one's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, let's try that. So I'm adding a little over 2 inches. Let's see if this does any better. So I've added some quick notes as well. That way, if I ever want to remake this, I have it to approximately the same thing. Sometimes you come back to a pattern later and you can't remember whether or not you need to add seam allowance or whether the pattern already includes seam allowance. In this case, this is good to go, cut out exactly as is. There is seam allowance along this edge, just a tiny bit, but the rest of it will be its proper final dimensions. Well, this will be gathered, but you get the idea. Alright, so cap attempt number 2. I have lengthened the stripe down the middle a little bit, so let's see how she fits. It doesn't feel very different. Did I grab the right cap? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and this is definitely the first cap in my hands. So this is the new cap. I mean, I guess that's good. If they feel kind of similar, then that must mean that it's kind of forgiving what measurements you use to make your cap if you make one, because they both feel pretty similar. Let me turn around for you. It is feeling pretty good though. Okay, it is nice and smooth back here, which is good. I was a little bit worried that if I had my measurements off or the curve off or something, that I would get lumpiness, but it's not too bad, so I think we're doing good. I think I'm gonna stick with this pattern. It seems to be good enough, at least. Good enough to continue on with making the cap. So pattern version number 2 is looking pretty good, so we can go ahead and keep this. And there's no reason to throw this bit of linen away. The actual project is going to be linen, and this is a perfectly fine little piece to work with. So we'll just seam rip this tester strip out and use this same piece. So I've deconstructed the cap, I've removed those gathering stitches at the bottom here, and I still have that seam allowance folded over. So I'm folding down the curved edge twice and then securing it with some quick little whip stitches. And now we're going to go ahead and join the two halves together with a decorative stitch. So it would be a little bit difficult to do the necessary herringbone stitches that should connect these two edges while the pieces themselves are sort of floating in the air in limbo like this. So in order to help stabilize them and provide a measurement for how far each of the next stitches should be, I have a little bit of graph dot paper. And so I'll use this both as a way to measure those stitches with the dots, and I will stitch it down to this paper in order to maintain the correct distance. So I've marked out my little ruler paper separator thing here, and this initial mark is just to kind of help me remember where my starting point is, which can be handy, and it's also a good visual of what my first stitch is going to look like. You want to have those herringbone stitches be approximately 45-degree angles from the surface that you're stitching to. And then to connect those two cap halves to the paper, I'm just going to do a running stitch. Apparently I'm a liar, because I said I was going to do a running stitch and then I immediately start doing a back stitch. So that might not be the most beautiful stitching, but it should hopefully keep things relatively in place, which is lovely. And then you can see what that back stitch looks like on the other side. So I'll just go ahead and continue this all the way down. Alright, so the first one is all done here. Let's go ahead and attach number 2. So I've got that stitched in, ready to go. And next up, we're going to start doing the herringbone stitches that connect these two. Okay, so I'm stitching a second row, and you'll note that on the bottom, see how the crossovers look the same? This one's on top and then this one's on the bottom. But then I switch it up on this cord because we're going for kind of a knotwork under over effect in the end. And then here's stitch row number 3, continuing with that over, under, over pattern where I can. And then this is row number 4. You can start to see a little bit more clearly how I need to weave under and over to make sure I continue that proper knot work like process here. After completing the 5th row, we are on to the 6th. We're in that good home stretch, and I've got just a few more stitches to do. So now that my groundwork of herringbone stitches is all done, I'm starting another row of stitches to interconnect them. First on the bottom row, and then I'll keep working my way up until I get to the next. If you're watching this, you've hopefully already seen my first video about how this stitch works. This is the more complicated version, but if you go and watch and practice that first version, this should make a lot more sense. At least that was the case with me. I didn't understand what the heck I was looking at first, but the more I practiced the simple version, the first time I tried this more complex version, it went fine, which was great. Once you know the basics, you're able to extrapolate how to make it, more complex. All right, and we are all done. It felt like it was taking absolutely forever. Let's see, zoom it in for you guys a little bit there. We go. I'm all done. I feel like there's a couple of spots where I made mistakes, where I had the wrong over-under pattern, which, I'm human, I make mistakes. But overall, pretty good success, I think. I'm very excited that it's done. Something that I didn't expect, and I think maybe I should have, but, there's a first time for everything, right? Is that, see how it's, well, maybe, can you see how it's sort of wrinkling? And if I show you the paper side, you can really see how the paper is sort of shriveling up on itself. And I didn't consider that after you do that foundation groundwork of herringbone stitches, as you work around them with each row of loops, you're sort of cinching everything tighter as you go. So even though I measured this to be about 1.5 centimeters or so to match the original, it is now a good bit smaller. Let's see. Well, 1.25 centimeters. I suppose it's not that much smaller, but if your goal is to also recreate this style of cap and for some reason you want it to exactly match the original, keep in mind that the distance that you set at the beginning needs to be a little bit bigger than your end because it's going to shrink with all of these rows of stitches. So something to keep in mind. I don't need all of these little stitches that are holding the paper in place, so let's go ahead and remove those. Lots of little fluffy thread bits to pick off, but we are free of the paper. So I'll get this all cleaned up and pulled away in a moment here. This is what that strip looks like after I've pulled it free. I did notice actually that I had taped the middle here because I didn't have graph paper that was long enough to cover the whole length of the seam, so I had to tape some together. And the extra stiffness at this point where I had it taped was actually really, really nice when stitching. This was a little bit more flexible and crinkly, so if you are doing something similar and are wanting to use kind of a similar graph paper hack to do your measurements and to hold your stitch open, so this one's just folded in half. This is normal weight paper. I would recommend maybe folding it so that you have 3 layers, or perhaps do 1 layer of tape down the whole thing in order to make something that's just a little bit stiffer. This was okay, this worked. I definitely would not try it with just 1 layer of paper. I think it would prove to be a little bit frustrating. So we want to go ahead and gather up that bottom edge. You can see here that I did 2 rows of gathering stitches. I just did so on a loop. Let me again zoom in for you. There we go. So you can see that this is 1 thread looped up on itself. Oh, you could do 2 completely separate ones and just kind of knot them together at the end. But what I'm gonna do to make my gathering stitches is pull this tight. There we go. So you can see that it made kind of this very densely packed little area of gathered stitches. Very lovely, good, good, good. Now the benefit of doing that 2 rows, or even better, you can do 3 or 4 if you'd like, that gathering stitch next to each other with, as you can see, I put these stitches directly one on top of the other so that they matched up perfectly, row and row and row. If you try doing just 1 row of gathering stitches, it'll still gather. In fact, let's go for it. Okay, so we have gathered those stitches, and it's fine. This would totally work. It's just a little bit more messy and unruly. So the next step is to bind this gather, and it's just a little bit harder to correctly gather everything up with it being so wily like this. I don't know if it makes much of a difference to you on camera, but this side is a lot neater for me than this side. This is just a jumbled up mess, and you can see how some of the pleats as you gather it will try and come all the way up, and if you're not careful while you're doing your binding, you can have little bits of raw edge poking out, and it's no good. Now, yes, you could just be careful and that wouldn't happen, but you can also make your life easier by doing a double row of gathering. So that is what I've done here, and that's what I'm going to do here in just a second. All right, so our pair of gathered bottoms are all nice and done here. Now we want to bind this gathered section as well as the whole front edge that surrounds the face. So I've cut a nice long strip of linen to act as our binder. Looks like, if I'm going by our 1-inch grid here, it's a little under 2 inches. So that's what we've got. The extant one had a approximately 1 centimeter edge on the front and then a slightly bigger one on the back, so that these two edges were not the same when sewed into the cap. I think that's my plan as well, if only because then in theory, this might not be why they did it, but that way right here there's 1 layer, 2 layers, and then 3 for the back. If I had these on top of each other, it would create just yet 1 more layer of bulk here. And by spacing it out this way, you reduce that bulk all in one spot along the cap. So my strip of fabric here is 59 inches long. I suspect that that is unfortunately not going to be enough, so I will have to put a join in my fabric with a third piece here somewhere. But for right now, let's see how far this will stretch. I am going to go ahead and put one of my ends down here. This is going to be the back of the neck. So I'm going to toss one of my seam beginnings way back here. That at least guarantees that one of them is relatively not visible in the end. Who knows where the other seam join's going to end up, but you know, whatever we can eliminate now is good. Let me start getting these pinned in place. Alright, so we are all pinned in place, and now I'm going to do a quick running stitch just to get the initial attachment of these two pieces together, and then I can flip it over and do a more proper felt stitch. Alright, so one beautiful little row of running stitches here, all done and ready. I've done this stitching to be just ever so slightly less than 1 centimeter, because by the time you roll this over and then again down this way, we're going to end up with something that's pretty darn close to 1 centimeter. So, and that is in fact the goal. So, excellent. Good, 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 good. So I'm probably going to get all of this folded up and kind of finger press it down and smooth, and then I'll go ahead and do an additional layer of whip stitches here just to securely attach everything. Probably not as much of a big deal at the top of the cap, but back here, where all of these pleats are, that whip stitching attaching to the gathering strip, that's going to help really set these pleats and keep them from, you know, coming out, which would be no good. There is a thread in here somewhere, which is gathering them nicely. Doing a bunch of whip stitches to the strip here will help keep those in place. It'll also help keep the strain, because eventually this is the end that's going to get pulled whenever you wrap the strap around your head. So this area is going to get a lot of strain and tension and pulling. So we want to secure that stressed area with some extra stitches. So important here, less important up here, but I'll do it anyway. One of the cool things about linen is that you can just kind of press into it and it'll mostly stay, which is pretty cool. So to stitch down the underside of this, I'm just gonna do a running stitch all the way along. That is what the original did, and I think that should be sufficient. We have some good strong hem stitches to secure these pleats over here, so running stitches to secure the other part of this should be fine. Alright, so we're all done with the band around the face here. Let's go ahead and continue on to the strap. And you can see I've already started. I just flip the ends in to meet the middle, and then up to each other. And then stitching the strap is very, very easy. Just a nice wee little running stitch. Maybe not so wee, depending on how lazy I'm feeling in any given stitch. Alright, so I've got that cap just about done, but before I can determine how long I want the tie parts to be, I need to try it on and give it kind of a quick test fit. And in order to try that on, I'm going to need to get my Wednesday Atom impression braids here up into a more appropriate style. I'm just gonna pin her up in place. Okay, round 2. Okay, so we are all pinned up. Hopefully it's not too messy. So let's take our cap and get that tossed on. Okay, so the idea is that the ties come up and around, and then they're going to be pinned in a loop, one continuous loop, once I've sewn it that way. Let's see what feels right. That feels kind of right, I think. Maybe. Maybe once I look at this later on the camera, I'll be like, ah, that's where I went wrong. Or right. I don't know. Because there's this theory based on some of the artwork from various medieval manuscripts and things, that the ties don't actually go all the way around the back around again. They go part way up, as I've been trying to demonstrate here and figure out. Ignore this part, we'll fix that later. But the rest of it, in theory, we want to be fairly firm back here. I can feel a little bit of extra fabric that I'm not in love with. Camera cut out, and I'm not quite sure where I left you, but I did some more fussing trying to figure out exactly where I wanted this this string to go. And I was trying to do that crossed braid thing, but I think I just had a little bit too much. Like, I was tightly crossing them, so too much of my braid was up here and not enough of it was back here filling up this this area. I am thinking, it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm thinking that the fullness is really, really strongly concentrated in the back, and I think it would look better, it would lie a little bit better. Instead of having the pleats super, super strongly focused in like 1 inch of space at the back, I think I'm gonna spread them out just a little bit more, and I suspect that'll make it fit and the pleats be a little bit better. But anyways, I've got my string here at the size that I want it to be. I've pinned it in place like so. So you can see there's a bit of overlap here that I'll need to take out and make it so it's just one simple bit of string. But that and adjusting the fullness a little, we're about done. Very exciting. So here's my overlap that I need to take out. I think I want the seam to be on this side. So these little pins are going to mark the exact points that I'm going to want to connect again later. So we'll keep those in as good marking, good guides. We'll cut this one off with some seam allowance. There we go. And I can remove this little extra bit. So I could finish off these edges and then whip stitch these two ends together, but I actually think that I I don't know that I would like that very much. I think that I'll get a cleaner finish if I connect these this way. So I think I'm going to whip these two edges together and then fold them and stitch this whole line. And there we go. It's certainly not invisible, but that'll do just fine, I think. And then next up, we're gonna go ahead and undo the stitching. I think I'm gonna make it so that the gathered section goes up to maybe here. All right, so I've opened her up. I've started undoing some of these pleats. I'm not gonna pull on them too hard though, because I'm just sort of gently going to tuck them up here, repin all this down, and then sew the pleats back in place. All right, so the cap is all done. I've redone those pleats that I mentioned earlier were giving me a bit of trouble, and put my hair back up. So let's see how she does. Okay, so, oh, I'm not very centered, but it feels pretty good. Feels pretty secure. The braid under here definitely helps with that secureness feeling, because that's kind of pinned to a certain point in my head, so it's hard for the cap to fall past this bulkier part of the braid. So that's great. All right, so I think that all in all, success. It definitely involved making a mock-up. Always a recommended thing for anything that I'm recommending that you try out. Definitely make a mock-up, because your satisfaction with your resulting end product will be a lot higher if you've gone through the trouble of making up an initial version, trying it out, making some changes as needed, and maybe even making a few mock-ups until you're happy with how things look. I think we're good, like, pretty happy with how it feels. I think that this is definitely something that I'll be able to wear to events, and it's nice because I think that this will be a good surface for veils to attach to. Do I have any veils nearby I can show you? Nope. Okay, well, another video maybe. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you consider making your own cap if you have any interest in medieval dressing up. It's maybe not the most super cute style on its own. Like, it's okay. But it makes a big difference for having it as a base for other styles, for veils and things like that. Highly recommend. All right, my little internet apprentices, go forth, create caps, show me pictures on Instagram, because I love seeing pictures of things that you guys have made, and I hope you have a wonderful evening of sewing. What do I wanna say? What do I wanna say? They go part way up as I've been. I feel like it's been a while since I've done a video where you got to see my face, much less had real-time? How do I say this? Where I talked on camera and didn't just do a voiceover later. And there's definitely something a little bit more personable about in-person chatting. Okay.